Welcome to Jitasa University, where our goal is to empower nonprofits through free educational content. These short videos are all provided by trusted partners within our network as well, so each topic will be relevant to every organization, regardless of size. Let's dive right in. This month, we're featuring Lauren from Social Impact Solutions, whose mission is to give nonprofits access to the best marketing and impact resources to help them communicate their value, accelerate their fundraising, and expand their reach. Let's pass things over to Lauren and get started with the video.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for watching today's video. My name is Lauren and I appreciate the intro, Alex, and we at Social Impact Solutions really appreciate our partnership with Jitasa. So today I'm excited to talk to you about making your mission measurable in 2026, how to measure the impact of your nonprofit programs. So this is something that our team talks about a lot at Social Impact Solutions. I care a lot about impact measurement. Others on our team care a lot about nonprofit marketing and fundraising. And so one of the reasons that we focus on impact measurement and communication so much is that funder expectations continue to shift and change. But one thing that has been consistent over the last few years is that major donors, major granting organizations, younger generations, corporate partners, all funders really care about the impact being created by your organization. So when I say impact, I really mean the change that you're creating. So not just number of people served, not your marketing metrics, but really the measurable change, the outcomes being created for the people you serve. And other studies show, other reports, studies, and surveys indicate that the number one reason donors give is related to the impact an organization creates. Our team has also distributed a survey to over 1,200 nonprofit leaders, and we have found that about 79% of respondents do not have basic impact measurement practices in place. 56% say they struggle to communicate their impact, and 88% struggle to have new monthly or annual donors on a repeated basis. So this is what we're starting to call the impact gap. And I don't know if we have officially coined this term or not, but we're using a lot internally because we're seeing a lot of nonprofits that really have outputs and activities, limited impact measurement, and they're struggling to measure and communicate their impact. So this on the left-hand side is the nonprofit world. And then on the right-hand side, we know that funders, they request, even demand measurable results and outcomes. They don't just want to fund activity or good intentions, they want to fund real change. And this requires a lot of data capture and analysis on the nonprofit's part. So if nonprofits don't have this information that funders care about most, then what we have here is this divide in the middle that we're calling the impact gap. So a Stanford Social Innovation Review article states that and shows through data analysis that the better nonprofits measure and communicate their impact, the more money they raise. This is a 2022 article, but point being, this isn't just my opinion or our team's opinion at Social Impact Solutions. Measuring and communicating impact is a really powerful piece of fundraising, growth, and sustainability for nonprofits. So today I really want to talk about how your organization can bridge this impact gap, how you can really start to measure your mission and really highlight these critical pieces that a lot of nonprofits are missing, but that funders really desperately care about. So today we'll talk about three really important pieces. They're certainly not the only pieces of impact measurement, but creating a logic model, creating measurable goals and objectives, and using validated assessment tools to capture impact metrics that matter most to your organization and your programs. So I like to start with a logic model exercise. One, it's really interactive, it's hands-on. Two, it's very practical. And three, I feel like this provides a roadmap and sort of sets the stage, gives good visual components to get multiple team members, even multiple departments on the same page before you get too far into impact measurement, a theory of change, or other pieces of impact measurement and communication. So logic models are great tools to align your team internally. It really helps clarify strategy and bring really practical components into place. So we see a lot of organizations with strategy, planning documents, theory of change, other strategic engagements that sound great, but they might not be super applicable or practical. And it ultimately is a bunch of documentation that ends up sitting on a shelf somewhere. A logic model is a great way to make this more practical and implementable. Logic models really help you define where gaps exist and how you can create improvement. It helps you start to bridge the impact gap, and ultimately, most importantly, helps you start to better serve beneficiaries by improving your programs. So I like to think of a logic model as a really good foundation and starting point for measuring impact. You don't have to start with a logic model, but I think it's a great way to get people on the same page and to really start to make things measurable and pinpoint the metrics that matter most to your organization, your mission, and each of your programs. So core components of a logic model include inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and long-term impacts. Inputs are, think of these as really important resources that your organization has that may cost a lot or take a lot of time. So like if you have a building, the staff that you have, if you've developed your own curriculum, if you have a partnership or a network, these are really important pieces to your mission that have probably taken months and years to develop and acquire. Activities are pieces that are the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month activities or responsibilities to execute your programs consistently. Outputs might involve things like number of people served, number of supplies distributed, number of volunteer hours that were given away. And most organizations stop at outputs. So today I really want to focus on outcomes and long-term impacts and how you can really start to measure these pieces that really show the change that's happening as a result of your programs. So this is what a very simple logic model can look like in a spreadsheet framework. So you see over here on the left-hand side, you highlight each of your programs. Then you have an inputs column, an activities column, and an outputs column. And then in this bright orange block here, we're really highlighting that this is where most nonprofits stop at outputs. But what we want you to do is bridge this gap and hop over to the right-hand side of the screen and really start to measure your outcomes and your long-term impacts. And you can go ahead and project what you want those outcomes and impacts to be, even if you're not measuring them yet, helping your team determine what change are we aiming to create, what metrics matter to program 1, program 2, and program 3. And how are we going to start to capture that information? So again, having this all in one place for each of your programs is a really good exercise, especially for operations and program teams, but even for marketing, fundraising, and other teams as well. So think of your logic model as a guiding roadmap, right? It doesn't have to be completely set in stone. If you're doing a road trip across, the country, across the United States, you might take a different route at some point in time. You might have to stop at an unexpected point. The same is true with a logic model. So it might change between now and June of 2026. You might add some things in. You might pivot a little bit. I know that plenty of organizations had to do this during COVID. Or in 2025, when various funding sources have been cut, it's okay to modify as you go, but think of it as a guiding roadmap that's helping you see, here's where we're starting, here's what we have, here are the resources we have, and here's where we're trying to go. Here's the change we're trying to create in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, so on and so forth. So a logic model is a great foundational piece for impact measurement, and it's a great guiding roadmap for you and your team. I know I went through that quickly, but just for the sake of time today, that's a high-level overview of logic models. And moving into measurable goals and objectives is the second piece that I want to cover for measuring your impact today. So measurable goals and objectives, emphasis on the measurable piece is really important. We see a lot of organizations that have some form of a goal in place, but it might not be measurable. And it might not be cohesive with objectives, or it might not have, be in place with a logic model. So I really like to create a logic model first. Again, that serves as a good roadmap to help people see where they're going, and then develop measurable goals and objectives after the fact to really help you and your team determine, okay, how are we going to measure and track these metrics, these pieces that we put in our logic model? How are we going to track progress towards what we outlined in our logic model? Core elements of measurable goals and objectives, goals being more high level, right? So broad overarching intentions that absolutely align with your mission and each of your programs. Ideally, you have one or two overarching goals for each program, and then each goal, I like to have anywhere between 2 and 4 measurable objectives for each goal. So the objectives being SMART objectives: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. All of these pieces really help your team determine, okay, here's where we're trying to go in the next, 1 to 3 years. Here's what we're trying to meet. Here's how we're going to measure it. And this is how we're going to track those metrics that we outlined in our logic model. So an example might be for a goal, you might have a broad goal trying to improve child literacy in your local community. But the more specific objective might be increasing the percentage of third graders reading level from 60% to 75% within 2 years. So there's a timeline associated with it. There's an improvement from that 60 to 75% mark. But point being, it's measurable, it aligns with the goal, it aligns with the program, and it's helping you measure metrics that you outlined in your logic model. Another important piece of measurable goals is they help funders and other stakeholders see the change that you're trying to create in the future, right? So talking about past results, past successes, that's important and that matters. But a lot of funders, volunteers, and other stakeholders, they want to know, where are you going in the future, and how are they playing a role in future growth, the future vision, and future change. And so having measurable goals and objectives really helps people to tangibly understand how their time, their dollars, their efforts that they give to you are helping you move the needle in the short term, the midterm, and the long term. So using these as internal tools as well as communicating them externally is also really valuable from a fundraising perspective as well. So key takeaways for measurable goals and objectives is to keep them clear and focused, to use them as internal accountability pieces for especially your programs, teams, and other teams related to impact measurement. And again, after you do your logic model, creating these measurable goals and objectives is the second foundational piece for impact measurement. The last piece here that I want to talk about is using validated assessment tools. And this is something that some of you may be familiar with. Others may not have heard of validated assessment tools, and that's okay. But what we see working with a lot of nonprofits is that many organizations create their own surveys to survey program participants, to get feedback from program participants. Some of them create their own surveys to try and start measuring their impact. The issue with creating your own surveys is that there's a lot of bias when your internal team creates these survey questions, and therefore that means there's not a lot of reliability with your data that's captured. So we like to use validated assessment tools as a way to more effectively measure your impact. And so again, starting with your logic model, goals and objectives, and then determining the tools that are going to help you measure that most effectively. Assessment tools, validated assessment tools can be surveys, assessments, questionnaires, but the point is that they're created by a third party, not by your organization. They take more of a research or evidence-based approach. Again, this reduces bias. It gives you better data, better results. This can be quantitative and qualitative data, so metrics and stories or testimonials. And ultimately, it's going to help you better measure your program outcomes. So a lot of people wonder, what does that look like for our organization? If you're in education, healthcare, workforce development, you know, There are so many different types of validated tools that have been created by universities, research institutions, other nonprofits. And so it's very, very rare that we work with an organization that isn't able to find one or more validated assessment tools that are relevant to their programs. Again, these validated tools are going to give you more reliable results. It will establish more trust and accountability internally and externally. A lot of times this allows you to be able to better compare pre-post results. So what was someone's life like before your program if they do a pre-assessment, and then what was someone's life like after your program if they do a post-program assessment, and comparing those results. And then ongoing improvement as well, right? It's not just about reporting the here and now metrics, but looking at where can you improve your programs based on the results of these surveys as well. So just an analogy here that might be helpful is if you're building a house, think about if you're using a ruler to build your house and measure all of your different angles. If you're using a tape measure, or if you're using more of an advanced laser to help you measure elevation and various angles and different degrees, which is going to be most accurate? And I think we can all agree that using a laser for measurements when you're building a house is absolutely going to be the most accurate when it comes to framing and all the foundational pieces. And this is how I like to think about these steps of impact measurement as well. A logic model, measurable goals and objectives, and validated assessment tools might feel more costly from a monetary or a time perspective, but in the long run, it's going to be more accurate. It's going to give you better results. It's going to save you a lot of time in the long run if you do it right the first way. And that's the same with building a house, right? You don't want to have to go back and tear parts down to redo dirt work, or you don't want to have to go, take out the windows because the framing wasn't done properly. So that is how our team looks at impact measurement and these foundational steps, and why we view them as so critically important. So just reviewing what we've covered today, we've talked about a logic model as a framework for determining what metrics you want to measure for each of your programs. We've talked about measurable goals and objectives to really help you and your team have something to measure against as 3 months, 6 months, 12 months passes, and to see how much progress you're making towards that intended change. And then using validated assessment tools to get better data, to actually capture data, ideally before and after your programs, to really compare where were people at baseline and then where are they at once they've completed your program. And using all of these pieces together is a really good starting point for getting good data and to measure not just outputs, not just number of people served, number of supplies given away, but really to start to measure improvements in knowledge, awareness, confidence and self-efficacy, and other core components that are relevant to your programs. So again, the evidence is really clear that organizations that measure and communicate their impact raise more money, they are able to grow and sustain for much longer than those organizations that don't know what their true impact is. And so if you're ready to close the impact gap in 2026 and really start to bridge that impact gap to move beyond activities and outputs, but really be able to communicate to funders the measurable change that your organization is creating, and to be able to communicate outcomes and long-term impacts, then I would encourage you and your team to go through a logic model exercise, start to develop measurable goals and objectives for each of your programs, and start to find validated assessment tools. Again, those are not the only pieces of impact measurement. We could be here all day if we talked about every step to take, but those are 3 really good starting points that I hope are really helpful for you and your organization as you try to measure and communicate your impact in 2026. So thanks so much for listening, and I would love to open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. A lot of great information in there. Just a few questions came up. The first one here is, how do you recommend nonprofits choose the most meaningful outcomes, especially when funders, board members, and the community stakeholders each have different priorities?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's definitely a challenge that a lot of organizations face, just internally, right? Marketing might care about certain metrics, fundraising teams care about other metrics, programs teams care about other metrics, and then maybe for larger organizations, if you have a program director for each organization or each program, then that varies too. And so that is another reason that I really enjoy going through a logic model exercise is it gets a lot of people on the same page. And so just this morning, I went through a logic model exercise with one of our clients, and their executive director was there. Their main operations person was there. They had a couple of programs, individuals, as well as marketing and fundraising team members. And so it really just helps to get multiple stakeholders on the same page. It doesn't mean that everyone agrees at the first go, but it's really just helping people to understand, okay, what is going back to our mission or going back to the purpose of this program? What are we really wanting and needing to measure? What matters most? And typically we walk away with anywhere from 5 to 10 key outputs for any given program, and then usually about 5 short and midterm outcomes and 3 to 5 long-term impacts. And so that would be my answer would be starting with a logic model would be a great way to get multiple people on the same page and looking at the same document, and at least open the floor for conversation around why various impact metrics might matter.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And then, do you have a recommendation on how often these metrics are reviewed by leadership?
Yeah, that's also a really great question. I think it typically varies, not necessarily on the size of the organization, though that could be a factor. But a lot of times what's going to factor in is how quickly is the organization growing and changing, right? If the organization has been about the same size for the last 5 years. They're about a 20-year-old organization, and everyone's pretty happy with where they're at. They don't have a large growth goal. They're really just wanting to maintain. Then I would say an annual review is sufficient to determine, does anything need to change at all? Are we happy with the data we have? If you have an organization that's really trying to grow pretty rapidly, grow and scale pretty quickly, then definitely every 6 months, maybe potentially even every quarter. But generally speaking, I would say an annual review is a good rule of thumb, because odds are you're not going to have a lot of data before that 6 or 12 month mark. So generally speaking, 12 months, but for organizations that are growing and changing a lot more rapidly, then a quarterly review could be really valuable.
Okay. Yeah. And the last one here, I think you might have already answered it, but for like a realistic starting point, if someone's just starting to do this, is your recommendation just the logic model to start out with? Are there steps before that they should take?
Yeah. So if you're just getting started with impact measurement, I do think that a logic model is a really good starting point. Before that, if you want to sort of analyze and determine, where are we at with budget and tech, and, are we using paper forms to capture information? Are we using spreadsheets? Do we have a CRM or a project management platform, some type of digital tool? That can be a good starting point, though it's not a requirement. But I encourage whether organizations are, 2 years into the impact measurement process or further, or if you're just getting started and you haven't done a logic model before, or you haven't done a theory of change, I think starting there is a really good place. Just again, to get multiple people on the same page, to have a good framework before we see this done in reverse order oftentimes. And what ends up happening if you do like goals and objectives first, and then we do various pieces, and then we determine later down the road what metrics we want to measure, we end up with surveys that are asking questions that don't pertain to goals and objectives. And you basically end up with data that's not telling you, are we making progress? Or data that's not telling you what impact is being created. So, yes, in short, if you're just getting started, I would encourage starting with a logic model. But also, if you've been doing this for a while but haven't approached it strategically or cohesively, then I would also encourage organizations to circle back to the logic model piece first.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that came up, but I want to thank you, Lauren, for taking the time and hope to have you and Social Impact Solutions on again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks for watching. We hope you learned some valuable information on how to measure the impact of your programs. If you had a question about the content or would like to chat about Social Impact Solutions services, feel free to reach out using the information provided on the screen. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.